1 hour basically with questions. So ideally, so if you kind of have the last 10 minutes for discussion, then that would be great. Okay, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Hubert. Thanks for the invitation. It's really a pleasure. And even so, as you said, this is work in progress with two friends and colleagues, Rezart Hoxhaj and Hubert Jayet, which probably they are here with us. And we have been working on time use for a while. And we have a few papers already using this sort of approach to investigate elements related to the economics of migration. But this is a more kind of comprehensive effort to, with the goal of understanding a bit better the overall allocation of time of immigrants in the US and how different and how peculiar it is with respect to native. Okay. So why we believe this is important? Well, knowing how we allocate time, it's from the point of view of an economist in particular, is quite a unique situation in which, if you think about that, the allocation of time, which is de facto the most scarce resource we have, is ex ante identical across individuals. We do, when we wake up in the morning, we have 24 hours to allocate. And then what actually comes out of this process of allocation of time is a very complex market and non-market mechanism through which multiple constraints, social obligation, our own choice, which are based on preferences, but also on the opportunity cost we face, they kind of make out a very complex and often heterogeneous outcome, which is very relevant in terms of the consequences that the allocation of time has for ourselves, but more in general for society. Here I make a few examples just as a motivation on the time that individuals spend in some activities is conducive to some health issue or health risks. Time we spend in education or work are kind of conducive to our accumulation of human capital or the way we perform on the job market. More recently, a few studies have focused on how exogenous shock like COVID affects how people allocate this important resource. What we try to do more specifically is trying to understand how immigrants are different from natives in the overall allocation of time. In particular, we focus, and as you will see, this is a dimension that we believe is very important on the differences by gender. In two terms, and also by looking at the gradient immigrants, natives across genders, but also looking at gender gaps. So how gender differences are kind of heterogeneous if we look at immigrants versus natives. Then we kind of zoom into those activities that are conducive to an overall different allocation of time. We explore here kind of two margins. What we call extensive margin is basically the probability of engaging in a different set of activities. And the intensive margin is the allocation of time to a certain activity, given that it's selected by an individual. So the first one is a probability of doing something. The second one, the intensive margin, is the number of minutes that are allocated to by an average individuals to a specific activity. Also, I think an important contribution of this paper is to look at assimilation from a different angle. So from how, looking at how immigrants assimilate over time into the overall pattern of allocation of time that we observe in a country. I don't think I have to convince you that immigrants. So looking at how immigrants allocate time, it's particularly interesting from a different perspective. It's important in terms of what we label economic integration of immigrants. Now we have work with Rezart and Hubert looking at formal and informal education. But also looking at other activities, like cultural activities, civic engagement activities, volunteering has a flavor of how individuals over time assimilate into the host society. Also, I think this was nicely motivated in one of the main paper in this literature by Habermesh and Trejo, the Journal of Population Economics 2013, where looking at the time use approach as an interesting advantage of giving us an idea of the process of assimilation rather than observing the final outcome as we typically do in our studies. Very quickly, for those of you who are not familiar with time use data, they have a long tradition, in particular by sociologists who started to collect long time ago information on how individuals spend their time. So typically, these are collected in time diary, when individuals describe what they have been doing in the previous day, in the previous 24 hours, and the time that has been spent in the different activities. These data are collected using without a predefined classification. Then there is quite a comprehensive coding system that is done ex post in order to standardize the different categories. Here you have a few examples of the macro category of activities that are recorded. The time use data in general, the categorization is highly detailed, and it's actually quite interesting categorization of more than 300 different types of activity. So here, for instance, you see sport and recreation in the time use data, in particular the US one that we use in this paper. Then you have details on the kind of sports, for instance, you are doing, whether it's baseball rather than football, and whether the religious activity, whether it's time for commuting to attend a mass or other type of activity. So the level of information is particularly disaggregated and makes these data, in my opinion, particularly interesting. So here you see an example, for instance, of one category falling into the macro category of education, like taking class. Then taking class is even more finely detailed in subcategory, like taking class for personal interest, taking class for a degree or certification, and so on. So gives an interesting picture on how people kind of allocate their 24 hours across a very, very large set of potential activities. So this is what we use, our main ingredient. We use the American Time Use Survey, different waves. We merge the waves from 2003 till 2019. We don't go before 2003 for reason related to the difficulties in identifying immigrants in previous survey. The number of these are daily observation, and there's a pooled cross section in terms of nature. So we have approximately 151,000 individuals, 23,000 approximately are immigrants. The initial level of disaggregation, as I was saying, is around 400 sub-activities, but we employ also, in order to compare these results eventually with results from other countries, to the 62 activities that are the standard coding of the multi-country time use survey. which covers something like 15, 20 countries around the world, for which these data are available and are standardized. What makes interesting, so the time use survey, the ATUS survey, is an add-on to the current population survey. So it has detailed information not only on time use, but also the characteristics of respondents, including their nationality, time since migration, whether they are second generation. So these are all information that we exploit in our analysis. This is, of course, not the first study using this data. I refer you to an interesting survey by Ribar. This was published in the Handbook of International Migration in 2015. But still, there are not many studies on exploring using time use data differences between immigrants and natives. We can think about the main drivers of the decision to allocate time to different and alternative activities as a combination of three macro drivers. Well, first of all, different barriers and constraints. Sometimes the linguistic barriers or legal limits and constraints are affecting the way immigrants can allocate time across different activities, but also the typically lower endowment of local social capital and connection might also affect the way people use their time. Here I refer to a couple of work, Amermesh and Trejo. They have explored both theoretically and empirically the allocation of time in what they label assimilation activities. So it's a set of macro and highly aggregated activities. They use a quite interesting theoretical approach, in order to explain some of the emerging differences. In particular, their theoretical model assumes the heterogeneity in barriers and entry costs in some specific activities, which predicts basically that immigrants are typically less likely to spend time in assimilation activities, but conditional on doing so, they spend more time on the different activity. We use a similar approach in the recent paper, which looks at informal and formal education. Then, of course, culture and tradition, including gender norms, that is one of the main driver of our motivation for writing this paper. They affect allocation of time, but also preferences and habits. And clearly, immigrants bring in the host countries also together with them also specific preferences and for some specific activity, which might explain the heterogeneity in time allocation. In terms of integration, we do expect that differences in time use will tend to disappear over time. So the convergence hypothesis that has been already found in when looking at some specific activities. So here we focus on the entire allocation of time to the whole set of activities. So what are the main novelty in our paper? Well, first of all, we look at the overall allocation of time across all activities rather than focusing on specific activities. So here the idea is to kind of analyze how an average immigrant differs from an average native born, and how we can attribute these differences to observable characteristics, so differences in socioeconomic characteristics or and location characteristics, versus those differences that cannot be explained by observable, that we label as associated with the status of being immigrant. We explore quite in details the gender dimension of these different allocation of time and the convergence hypothesis, so how these differences tend to evolve over time, so over time since migration. So how do we approach this question? So we use a combination of parametric and non-parametric methodology. So for each of the 62 activity, we estimate conditional differences as follows. For the what we call the extensive margin, so the probability of selecting an activity, J, then we estimate a simple probit model where our main variable of interest is the dummy variable, which is equal to 1 when the individual is an immigrant. And we control for a rather rich set of covariates. I will be more explicit in, well, I can tell you. So we control for age, educational level, for marital status. So these are included in this vector xi. Income of the family, number of children, we include state and year fixed effect in order to control for the specific location. Then in terms of the intensive margin, so time spent on a specific activity, conditional on participating, we estimate a truncated regression that has a similar specification here. So our variable of interest, our main parameter of interest is beta 0 in the first, for the probability of participation, and beta 1 for the time spent in the different activity. So here, what I was saying, so the set of controls. So we distinguish whether the time diary was collected for a weekend, during the weekend, or a weekday, and as we know that the allocation of time might be substantially different in weekend when different constraints are not there. Then we measure, we condition the, we split the immigration dummy into a set of dummies that take into account the time since migration. We have 3 different categories. So less than 10 years in the US, between 11 and 20 years in the US, and more than 20 years. We extend the analysis also to second generation in order to better identify the overall dynamics of time use as also for the new cross generation. Then we compare the overall distribution, both the unconditional differences, so the difference that emerge from a simple analysis of the ATOS data, from our difference which we called conditional, so that are net of the observable characteristics that I just mentioned, and we apply, we compute a simple measure of the differences across the subpopulation, natives versus immigrants, and men versus women, using the mean standard deviation. Why mean standard deviation? Because it allows as the nice features of allowing us to decompose the different allocation, the differences in the distribution of allocation of time between the different population in the two different component participation, so the differences in the mix of activities that are performed by immigrants and natives versus the differences in the duration of the activities conditional on participation, on selecting a specific activity.
Sorry, Nicola,
Yep.
very quick questions. I mean, obviously, the country of origin matters, right? So which culture you come from, and
Yep.
so different people will obviously over time will have different impact. And also in terms of the second generation, I mean, you seem to be kind of putting all the migrants in one category, including second generation, and comparing them to natives. Is that what?
No. The second generation, so we consider them we don't put in the same silos the second generation. So, but as it will be clear in a while, we basically so in the first by immigrants, are the combination of the three different categories. So depending on the duration, then we split them and we consider as a different category the second generation. So we compare the second generation to natives. That's the exercise. We don't put them together in the.
Oh, sure, I understood that part. But I mean, do you compare second generation with like the first generation?
With natives.
No, but I mean, it could be, right, an interesting kind of thing to see how the second generation is. I mean,
Okay, so it can be done. So we have not done it. So basically, because the goal here is to see how immigrants converge over time spent in the US to an average American, also an average native born, which includes the second generation
But you see,
and then
sometimes the kind of there is almost like a cultural difference between the second generation and the first generation.
Yeah, so what you are suggesting is that this should be compared in a distinguished way, So this can be done. We have not done yet in the paper this direct comparison. So there is an indirect comparison, as you will see, but we can talk about it later. In terms of the country of origin, that's it's a very relevant issue. We do have information on the country of origin, so it's possible to take into account it explicitly. The comparison becomes a bit more robust for many nationality because of then very few observation. So for Mexican, it's possible. For some other nationality, country of origin is possible, but I would say that becomes a bit more problematic when you look at many other origin country for which you don't have a lot of observation in the ATUS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, one option could be just to kind of do one thing just with Mexicans, and because that's probably the biggest group, and just to see.
Yeah, that's the largest, by far the largest group. So it's possible to do exactly what I will show you, but only for the Mexican first generation migrants in the US.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So that's we compare the distribution considering the 62 activity labeled as J here for the two subpopulations. So I will be equal to natives and immigrants when we do direct comparison, or male and female in some of the estimates that I will show you. So the Thai IJ is a combination of the participation of the estimated participation rate and the estimated average duration of participation. When I will show you conditional results, these P and theta, are net of the effects on the allocation of time of observable covariates that I was mentioning before. So we decompose the mean standard deviation into, well, 4 different parts. So the 2 relevant parts are the first 2, where we isolate the impact on the differences between the 2 subpopulation in participation rate, which means the probability of selecting a different set of activities, from the impact that depends on the different duration of in minutes that is allocated to the different activities. Then we have 2 less clear-cut components. One is it's basically an undistinguishable correlation between participation and duration. And the 4th, it's a marginal element which is related to the fact that when we estimate, so when the mean standard deviation is computed on the conditional data, then the overall allocation of time can be slightly different, so marginally different. This typically, as you will see, it's a very, very minor bias, but of course it's should be taken into account. So jumping on the results. Now here you see a first computation of the differences in how migrants and natives allocate their time by gender. So here you see that the mean standard deviation computed on male immigrants is larger. So the allocation of time is more different for men compared to women, and is largely due to differences in participation for men rather than the duration of the activity. So this is the unconditional difference without considering any differences in the characteristics of this population. When we condition the difference on socioeconomic characteristics, as you will see, the differences between natives and immigrants go down substantially for women, but not for male immigrants. And again, the prevailing determinants of this difference is in the set of activities that are performed by the 2 subgroups. So basically, the differences in characteristics, they do reduce partly what the observed differences, but not by large, in particular for male immigrants. We look at gender gaps. So basically here in this table, we are comparing male and female by status of immigrants and natives. And from these results, what you see is that now gender differences in time use are much more pronounced for immigrants. And the large difference compared to natives are only partly reduced when we control for the different set of characteristics. So these results, in our opinion, is giving us a strong evidence of something that it's quite well known in the literature, using different approaches on the higher intra-household specialization of immigrants' family, which is reflected in our study in the allocation of time. So as you can see here, the mean standard deviation are substantially larger for immigrants, showing a larger gender gap, which is only partly absorbed by controlling for different characteristics. Again, in terms of the decomposition, the differences are largely due to the different mix of activities, so to participation rather than the differences in duration in the activity. Yeah.
Nicola, there is
Okay,
there's a comment in the chat that the conditional and unconditional for natives is exactly the same.
for natives is exactly the same. Yes, yes. So because what we compare here is basically the differences in the beta, no? So in the estimated differences that are associated with the status of immigrants. Without, in the unconditional, they are for and controlling for the characteristics. So this is basically the divergence between immigrants and natives, without accounting for differences in the characteristics and accounting for differences in socioeconomic characteristics. So when you there are no differences when you look at the conditional by definition. I mean, this is a comparison. It's basically the second and the fourth column are based on the parametric analysis on how the beta are changing. I don't know if I answered the.
Yeah, Leslie, if.
Okay. So then what we try to understand is we zoom into the different activities and we try to better understand in which type of macro activity we observe the largest differences, and also by trying to understand also how controlling for observable characteristics is changing the magnitude of these unconditional differences that we observe. So in this diagram, you see a snapshot of the results. You see a set of activities that are spread in these four quadrants. The first one is basically it's capturing those activities for which we observe that there is a positive difference in participation, so the probability in engaging in the activity for both men, that we are measuring the difference between immigrant and native for men is measured on the horizontal axis, and while on the vertical axis we measure the difference between immigrants and natives for women. Okay, so in the first quadrant here, there are activities in which it's more likely for both male and female immigrants to have a higher probability of participation. So here you don't see many activities, but some of them are related to kind of relax or the probability of engaging in a main job or in commuting. In the second, you have activities for which you observe higher probability for male but lower for female. The third, lower probability for both, and the fourth is the opposite, so higher probability for female and lower probability for male. So here you see that there is a kind of gender specialization, in particular in activities that are related in housekeeping in the fourth, that are not keeping, which you see a larger difference between female immigrants and female natives, while typically on job-related activities there is a higher probability of participation for male immigrants compared to male natives. This is the same results, but where we compare actually male and female immigrants. So we look at the gender gaps for immigrants and natives. Here you see that. This is for the duration. Confusing a bit. So these are the differences in minutes that are spent in the different activities, again by gender. So here you see that there are lots of activities in particular related to work, commuting, education, but also social events and other things which there is a higher duration conditional on participating for male and female. I don't have much time to go through that. Let me spend some time on looking at how these differences change over time. So in this slide, you see differences, both unconditional differences and conditional differences in respectively in the first and the second panel for male and female. So these are different migrants and natives according to time since migration. So in the first column, you see the male immigrants that have been staying in the US for less than 10 years. And so as we move to from left to right, the time since migration is increasing, and the second generation in the fourth column. So here you see that when we look at the overall differences, there is a relatively slow convergence, unconditional convergence for male immigrants. So it's only after 20 years that the mean standard deviation is reduced substantially, and that's basically identical to that of the second generation. While for women, there is a steady reduction over time, though when we look at the conditional differences for women, we see that basically the mean standard deviation is rather stable, so there is a slow reduction, but not highly substantial, which is signaling that the convergence that we observe in unconditional time use allocation is mostly driven by a convergence in observable characteristics over time. Similar pattern in terms of the composition emerge. So the differences for male are mostly due to differences in participation, so in the mix of activities, while for female are mostly due to differences in the duration of the different activities. Also here you can appreciate that for the second generation, there is we observe basically a full assimilation. So there is no difference, no significant difference vis-a-vis native population. So going back to Matlub question, so this is in a sense is an indirect comparison with first generation migrants, but I do see that it's possible and probably worth to do a direct comparison between immigrants, well, first generation and second generation immigrants. This can be surely done. We do a similar things, putting as a comparison here the evolution of the gender gaps. So here we compare men and women by status. So in the first column you see the differences, so gender gaps for natives in the allocation of time. Here we compare them with gender gaps of immigrants by years since migration. So here you can see we can focus directly on the conditional. You can see that there is a steady reduction, but still the differences continue to be quite persistent vis-a-vis natives. Again, for the second generation, we basically do not observe any significant difference with the native population. So it's a full integration after for second generation. Okay, then one last exercise. We try to understand what are the main contributors to this observed time use convergence. So here what you see is there are two panels where we consider the difference again by gender. So the differences for men on the horizontal axis and for female on the vertical axis. So here, what we do is basically we look at how time since migration affects these differences. So just to make you an example here, this is when the endpoint is below 10, no, this is the estimated difference for male and female for immigrants staying in the US for less than 10 years and on specific activity. The endpoint is the estimated difference for individuals who have been residing in the US for more than 20 years. So they basically each segment is telling you the direction of change in this difference. So for main, by looking at participation, so the probability of engaging in main work. So here you see that there is a convergence for male. So there is a reduction in the difference between natives and immigrants for male. But there is an increase in the difference for female. So for cooking, you see on the contrary, there's a reduction in gender specialization, and there is a substantial reduction in the higher probability for female to engage in this activity, and a slight increase for male. Mostly, so the same. So, for instance, here another, you see for some activity related to leisure, in particular gardening or going to restaurants and bar, over time you see a convergence of the immigrant population, both male and female, toward the immigrant, the natives counterpart. So, what we observe in general by this analysis that there is an overall pattern of convergence in most activity, and also in general a reduction in the gender gap, and similar for the when we look at duration of this activity. I think there are only a few minutes left, but I will jump to the conclusion in order to leave some time for your comments and suggestions. So what we do in this paper, we look at the overall distribution of time for immigrants and natives, and trying to understand how these allocations diverge, and what factors are kind of behind the different allocation of time. So explicitly considering the importance of a set of socioeconomic and demographic characteristics. Many things are not explained in this analysis, like what is driving this convergence, for instance, whether it's convergence in norms or in preferences, or whether some of the non-observable constraints and opportunity costs are changing. So this is left to other analysis. I think what is interesting is the results in terms of these gender differences and their evolution over time. Does it matter? Well, I will not argue that this has any direct normative implication. So how we spend our time, in a sense, is more by definition a positive analysis. Although I think this is an important stepping stone for understanding the overall pattern of assimilation and integration, which has, on the other hand, a very important normative flavor. Matruba will stop here, and will be happy to comments and suggestion or.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. Any questions, comments?
Let me stop the.
Okay, so while people are thinking, I mean, just going back to the country of origin thing, I mean, I understand that your sample size might be small, but is it possible to do, because you mentioned religion kind of, and gender and religion aspects and stuff like that. I mean, there are two possibilities. One is either do it regional, kind of, European, Southeast Asian, whatever. That should be a reasonable group, right? So you can kind of, people coming from Europe are going to be different than people coming from, South Asia. And so, that might be a possibility to kind of explore a little bit of that difference. And I mean, if that's not possible, but even if it is possible, maybe I mean, you have religion, right? For everybody, you have, you can try kind of by religion. So, some religion might be, because of the religious kind of the activities related to religion, that could be different for different religions, and also in terms of the preferences and other like gender norms and stuff. So that might be one way of at least looking at the differences of which ones in a way assimilate at what rate, so to speak.
No, that's definitely important and feasible. So we do have information in the country of origin. So using the information directly might kind of split too thinly the observation, as I was saying. But still, we can, for instance, exploit some specific dimension of the country of origin, like GDP per capita or measure of cultural distance. That's definitely feasible. And thanks. I think also using macro area rather than reaggregating the country of origin by macro area. That's also a possible solution to kind of to better explore, to use an additional dimension that might be relevant in allocation of time. Thanks, Marco.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Any other comments? So if I just kind of, okay, in terms of the mechanism, I just thinking, is it all kind of driven by economic, sort of adjustment, if you like? So just Chiswick many years ago kind of argued that over 20 years, the immigrants kind of converge in terms of the wages with the natives. I mean, what I'm thinking is that when you arrive initially, you are kind of more concerned about settling down in terms of economic kind of, finding a job and performing better in the job and stuff like that. So your probability of getting into other activities are driven in a way by the wage, economic assimilation, I'd say. And so over time, as you earn money and as you kind of become more settled, then you have more time to spend on other activities. And it might also explain kind of, I saw that one of the, like cooking or whatever, it might be that the household kind of division of labor is like that, where one person is looking for a job and get settled and stuff. And once they are in that position, then the other person can spend time as well. It's kind of a primary and secondary.
Yeah, well, I think looking at mechanism ideally, in order to have a more credible underpinning of the mechanism, you will want to have longitudinal data that are not typically available in for this kind of survey. So we can control for some characteristics, so it becomes quite evident that some of the the mechanism go through the labor market, kind of employment dynamics that are also explaining why probably you observe a much larger divergence between immigrants and natives, in the first 10 years. This divergence tend to become smaller. I think one key finding of our analysis that still we do even the persistence of the difference, in particular of the gender difference over time, are quite strong. I mean, it's difficult to disentangle whether this is related to kind of differences in constraint and opportunity cost versus norms or preferences. Probably what you were suggesting might go in the direction of understanding a bit better, so how maybe differences in cultural preferences or kind of cultural distance with the US might explain partly the persistence of this difference. But I would say that, I mean, this is something that we are struggling a bit to kind of pinpoint specific mechanism that might drive the results. That's I think it's quite challenging with the data, with the US data at least. And I think we can.
No, I'm just thinking that, kind of it enriches the analysis a little bit, because you're trying to kind of not only show the part, the positive part element of it. Not that necessarily you are kind of making any judgments, but just to kind of explain the process of this thing and what is driving all the aspects. Almas, you have a question.
Thank you for your presentation. Regarding Matlub's suggestion, this convergence, there is a new development in convergence studies that it talks about club convergence, that you could use this heterogeneity in convergence in income by country of origin or by some other characteristics, not simple convergence models that we had, but club convergence allows for heterogeneity by different categories. Thank you.
Thanks, very useful. Yeah. So I think so our goal for comparing the unconditional versus conditional goes in the direction in trying to net out the role of some of the mechanisms. Clearly, there is more to do in terms of kind of understanding the different the heterogeneity within this macro category that we have now. I think which can definitely enrich. Thanks for the suggestion. I think that's something we will have to do to try to understand a bit better, the convergence process over time.
So, Nicola, I might have missed it, but do you know where these people live? Do you have the characteristics of their location in the US?
Yes, so we have information at the metropolitan area of the metropolitan area. So this is another element that probably we can exploit in terms
as a
of
mechanism, right? Like if you can measure what's the ethnic enclave concentration, like that could speak to your convergence. Like if you live in a community of all, Polish people and you're Polish, you're not going to converge to the natives because you're going to do everything the same way that everybody else is around you doing, just like you did at home. But if you live in an area with more natives, I think that could be a useful avenue to pursue.
Excellent. Yeah, I totally agree. And also, as you were speaking, I also thinking that clearly also the differences in residential area, metropolitan versus rural, might also explain kind of the constraints and the set of activity that are actually available to individuals, irrespectively of kind of the density in terms of migrants from the same origin country, for instance. Thank you. That's definitely a very interesting direction that we can explore.
Any other comments, questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, thanks very much, Nicola. That's great presentation.
Thank you, Matlub.
Nice paper.
Thanks to
Whenever it's ready, we would love to make it. If you send it to GLO, we'll put it on as the discussion paper.
Will be a pleasure. Thanks a lot, Matlub. No, it's the paper is at the stage where this kind of presentation and suggestion are really precious for improving it. Thanks for spending your time with me.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you
you
very much for presenting, and we'll catch up soon. Bye.
Matlub. Thanks.